Join me today as I show you how I scratch built this water tower for my Kill Team game board. I started out with a container for cream, and I started peeling everything, all of the labels off, but I didn't completely clean it off. I gave it a good sand, but I didn't get rid of all the glued paper, because that'll add a nice rusted texture later on. I then grab a dish and start cutting a circle out. That'll be the little walkway along the edges of the water tower. You just grab whatever you can find. That'll fit 32mm miniatures up there. I also roughly find the center. I measure roughly 4.5 centimeters, I think, from either side, and place the container in the center just to give me a good line to cut out for the centerpiece. After all of those pieces are cut out, I get some drywall tape here. And I start by cutting out trapeziums or trapezoids. The top is 2 inches and the bottom is 4 inches, and you kind of see how it comes down at an angle on either side. And this will allow me just to place them along the circle in a nice, even sort of pattern. And you can see where they cross over. It's not clean or even, really, but I can just cover that up later on. A lot of this build is finding different sized round objects to make the nice round disc have a lot of different layers of detail. So I find another piece which is much smaller than it is before, and this is going to be the ring along the inside of the main walkway. And once that's cut out, I just neaten up some of the drywall tape and secure it in with some hot glue. A lot of things here, I'm going to be using hot glue to secure them because I'm way too lazy to wait for PVA glue to dry. For the outer edge, I have cut this duplicate piece that I'm not going to use anymore. So I'm just going to measure 1 centimeter from the end. Now, if you had a compass or a protractor, or whatever they're called, and also if you had like more round objects, you wouldn't need to make your own round object. But nevertheless, it works alright if you just take it nice and slow and be real careful with drawing out your circle. I then cut a small piece out which will serve as the little entryway for the ladder that's going to come up, and I just secure that to the entire tube or bottle just using some hot glue again. And for the bottom, if I was smart, I would have done this before gluing on the walkway. But I just cut a small circle to fit on the end at the bottom. For the legs, this is really scratch built rough. I just get a 4-inch piece of a popsicle stick and measure 2 lines 3 inches apart, and then just stick on these little dowels that I got. I also add a little bit more detail by adding a little bit of a coffee stir stick. And so I can get a bit of an angled look, I give the bottom of the dowels a bit of a sand, so that way they're not sitting flat, straight up and down. I then stick the legs to the bottom, and I'm not measuring anything here, I'm just sticking things together. This is really easy and it comes out looking great, so why bother measuring when slap chop works just fine. Alright, now we're over at a different camera angle. I'm going to cut some more popsicle sticks at 4 inches long and stick that along the bottom just to keep the legs nice and in line and straight and also the same length. That way it's not lopsided. After doing that, I'm also going to add some details around the edges of the walkway, and I'm just using some of this coffee stir stick, but if you didn't have something that fits straight away, you can just use some cardstock as well. For the little walkway around the top, I'm just going to drill some holes that will fit barbecue skewers into them. I'll then cut these barbecue skewers to roughly just a little bit above an inch. That way when they're slid in, they're about an inch tall, which is pretty good for the size of the miniatures. These ones I slide in and secure with some PVA glue because it's easy enough to do that and they can just sit there and dry. I then build the ladder up using a method you've probably seen online before. I use some masking tape to hold down 2 barbecue skewers, and then I just use these little coffee stir sticks and place them about 1.5 inches or half an inch from each other. And this ends up looking like a neat little ladder. I also use some clamps to clamp it together while it's drying. Once it's dry, I carefully remove it because some of the parts have stuck to the cutting mat underneath. Just being very careful just to slide it off. And I stick that on with some hot glue after cutting it to size. I also go through and cut any excess that's hanging down from the poles up the top. And then I use some more coffee stir sticks to build the little struts that will be sticking between the legs. I'm just using some tacky glue to hold these together as well. I then build a little pipe going down to the bottom, and I use a paper straw and a plastic straw. I cut the paper straw into these small little pieces that will act like the joiners or the connection points for the actual pipe. And then I just stick them on to the plastic straw. The real good part is that it just slides on really easy, and you don't need to cut something to size because this already is the right size. For some more detail, I cut some cardstock and run a couple of rings around the bottom and the top of the entire water tank. I then build up some of the walkways to be a bit more like they're actually protecting you from falling off, by adding a couple of bars. Again, using some coffee stir sticks and some tacky glue. Back to the heads down camera for texturing some popsicle sticks. I just roughly cut these into some random shapes and then give them some texture by rubbing them onto a chisel or a file. They're one of the two things, that is it. And this gives it some nice wooden texture, and this is just going to be like a little wooden planks at the top that have been moved there after, I don't know what's happened here, nuclear bomb maybe. I've had these little acrylic dots for ages, so I'm finally going to use them on something as little rivets where the little bands of cardboard that I put, where they meet up. I've then got some randomly cut pieces of cardstock and corrugated paper that I'm just going to add like some metal plating that's been stuck up here to give you a bit more protection during nuclear fallout, I suppose. And when building like this, it's really good to channel that inner orc that everyone has. Even the Emperor. It's true. I then give it a spray of a putty primer. Now this stuff is way better than just a normal primer because it kind of like unifies all of the different textures and makes everything take paint way better and sticks to like anything. It's super great and it fills little gaps, cracks as well. It's just a miracle product that I'm using on everything now. I then give it a spray of a metallic silver as well, which is much more boring. To be honest, it's just a silver. I then use some red and brown chalk pastels, some bicarb soda, some orange paint, and mix them together to try and make some sort of rust texture paint. It doesn't work too great, but I'm kind of happy with how it came out in the end. I definitely need to improve the mix though. You can see how it hasn't really stained anything at all. It just kind of flowed way too much because it was way too watery. So I just added it into my normal brown wash, and this gives it more of a darker orangey brown look. And then I just mix that over everything. Going over a couple of details, making it look like it's streaking in parts, letting it pool in certain areas, and really making it look like an old rusted tower. Alright, now we're getting closer to it being done. We have a nice rust sort of texture building up there. So now we're just going to start stippling on some white, because they paint water towers white to keep the water not hot. And I just stipple this on using a sponge that I've torn up. I don't really care for 100% coverage at all, because this is really old and rusty. Quite nicely, the wooden pieces at the top, when they were covered in that brown wash, they all absorbed it and turned brown. So I just give them a quick dry brush. I then also, once that's all dry, try my hand at a bit of stencil work. I found the best way to do this was to press down on the flaps that are flapping up. Like the little curvy part of the 7, little bit at the top that's like trying to flap up. You can see it with the 5. Just keeps flapping up. Press down on that piece. And it works pretty well. I don't know what 57 is though. Once that's done, I also add on a little ladder that I made out of some coffee stir sticks as well. And this just adds to the story. It's a little bit different to everything else. The next morning I come in with some sepia shade and add in some more grime and gunk and really just dark light, highlight, dark shadow. All of the darker edges, like the tops where water's corrugated, and draw some little running pieces of water and just really grime it up a bit more. I am super happy with how this came out in the end, and I think I might try my hand at some rust paint textures in the future again as well, because that is pretty fun. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week with something different.